What's going on, family? Thank you so much for tuning in, and welcome to another episode of 3.5 Podcast, the political education show where we believe with just 3.5% of a population that's organized, disciplined, and educated, we can make significant structural change. I'm your host, Sierra Bell, and I have a great episode for you today. And I recorded this intro after I recorded the episode because I realized I forgot to say my name in the intro that I recorded at first. So, I'm still figuring all this stuff out and trying to, create habits for this show, like saying your name. So I hope that you learn a lot. I hope that you find some information valuable. And here it is. Check it out. Today I want to talk about ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but in the light of how U.S. foreign policy influences immigration, specifically from Latin America. I want to talk about this because this will be technically the first video where I really try to emphasize that Democrats are not your friends, nor are Republicans. They are two different wings of the same bird. Both Republican Party and Democratic Party have horrendous U.S. foreign policies that affects us domestically, and ICE is one of those examples. And it's been for a very long time that the U.S. has been overthrowing Latin American leaders, destroying Latin American economies through sanctions, through military intervention, through funding violent opposition in those countries to cause chaos, to really try and impose U.S. commercial interests, neoliberalism, to get rid of socialism or any type of social welfare or social policies that target the well-being of the people. U.S. goes in, tries to shut that shit down, throw up a leader that will open up their natural resources to U.S. companies in all types of craziness. And a lot of times this leads to extreme violence and crime and poverty that forces these people in these countries to make the decision to leave and find some other place to go. I want to focus on this because we look at ICE like a Trump problem. We look at ICE like this is all Trump's fault, and it's not. And in fact, this has been an issue before Trump even came into office. Okay, Honduras. A lot of immigrants are from Honduras. And when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State during the Obama administration, Hillary Clinton was integral in helping to overthrow the Honduran president.
With the New York primary less than a week away, the race for the Democratic nomination continues to heat up. Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders will meet Thursday in Brooklyn for their first debate in over a month. We begin today's show looking at Hillary Clinton and Honduras. Earlier this week, the former Secretary of State publicly defended her role in the 2009 coup in Honduras when the military seized democratically elected President Manuel Zelaya in the middle of the night, deposed him, and sent him into exile. Since the coup, Honduras has become one of the most violent places in the world. Clinton was asked about Honduras during a meeting with the New York Daily News editorial board on Saturday. The question was posed by Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez.
Secretary Clinton, I'd like to ask you if I can about Latin America.
Yes, Juan. Yes.
and the policy specifically that you were directly involved in, the coup in Honduras. As you know, in 2009, the military overthrew President Zelaya.
Right.
There was a period there where the OAS was trying to isolate that regime. But apparently some of the emails that have come out as a result of State Department releases show that some of your top aides were urging you to declare the military coup, cut off U.S. aid. You didn't do that. You ended up negotiating with Oscar Arias a deal for new elections. But the situation in Honduras has continued to deteriorate. There's been 300 people killed by government forces. All these children fleeing and mothers from Honduras over the border into the United States. And just a few weeks ago, one of the leading environmental activists, Berta Cáceres, was assassinated in her home. Do you have any concerns about the role that you played in that particular situation, even not necessarily being in agreement with your top aides in the State Department?
Well, let me again try to put this in context. The legislature, or the national legislature in Honduras and the national judiciary actually followed the law in removing President Zelaya. Now, I didn't like the way it looked or the way they did it, but they had a very strong argument that they had followed the Constitution and the legal precedents. And as you know, they really undercut their argument by spiriting him out of the country in his pajamas, where they sent, the military to, take him out of his bed and get him out of the country. So this began as a very mixed and difficult situation. If the United States government declares a coup, you immediately have to shut off all aid, including humanitarian aid, the Agency for International Development Aid, the support that we were providing at that time for a lot of very poor people. And that triggers a legal necessity. There's no way to get around it. So our assessment was we will just make the situation worse by punishing the Honduran people if we declare a coup and we immediately have to stop all aid for the people. But we should slow walk and try to stop anything that the government could take advantage of without calling it a coup. So you're right. I worked very hard with leaders in the region and got Oscar Arias, the Nobel Prize winner, to take the lead on trying to broker a resolution without bloodshed. And that was very important to us, that, Zelaya had friends and allies, not just in Honduras, but in some of the neighboring countries like Nicaragua, and that we could have had a terrible civil war that would have been just terrifying in its loss of life. So I think we came out with a solution that did hold new elections, but it did not in any way address the structural, systemic problems in that society. And I share your concern that it's not just government actions. Drug gangs, traffickers of all kinds are preying on the people of Honduras. So I think we need to do more of a Colombian plan for Central America, because remember what was going on in Colombia when first my husband and then followed by President Bush had planned Colombia, which was to try to use our leverage to rein in the government in their actions against the FARC and the guerrillas, but also to help the government stop the advance of the FARC and guerrillas. And now we're in the middle of peace talks. It didn't happen overnight. It took a number of years. But I want to see a much more comprehensive approach towards Central America, because it's not just Honduras. The highest murder rate is in El Salvador. And we've got Guatemala with all the problems you know so well. So I think in retrospect, we managed a very difficult situation without bloodshed, without a civil war that led to a new election. And I think that was better for the Honduran people, but we have a lot of work to do to try to help stabilize that and deal with corruption, deal with violence and the gangs and so much else.
Following that, plunged Honduras into extreme violence, and people began to flee. And so a lot of immigrants come from that legacy. As an example, that's just one of many examples, okay? So this article, How U.S. Foreign Policy Helped Create the Immigration Crisis. This is an article in The Nation. The war on drugs has given weapons and political protection to oligarchs. The U.S. response has been a war on drugs that provides these same oligarchs with political protection and more weapons. In 2009, for example, the Obama administration ensured the success of a coup by the Honduran military against an elected president whose modest social programs of food and education for the poor had enraged the ruling class. Since then, U.S. aid to the Honduran oligarchs has more than doubled. Since then, since the overthrow of this elected president, U.S. aid to the Honduran oligarchs has more than doubled. U.S. aid to the oligarchs. Yet 2/3 of Hondurans live in poverty. Large numbers inhabit shacks without toilets and can't afford to buy shoes for their children. And the murder rate among Latin American countries is second to only that of El Salvador, which has received even more U.S. aid. 5 years after the Honduran coup, the number of children illegally crossing into the United States increased by 1,272%. Over 1,000% increase. That is after we destroyed their country during the Obama administration. That's not Trump. In fact, that's Obama. That is Saint Obama and Hillary Clinton. The debate is entirely focused on domestic policy, how to treat the undocumented after they have arrived. Democrats, thinking Latinos will vote for them, want the newcomers to stay. Republicans, fearing Democrats are right, want them sent back. Employers want their cheap labor. Workers fear their wage competition. The clash of these agendas further inflames simmering social tensions over racism, political tactics, and cultural identity, which in turn feed Trump's reactionary base. Lost in these U.S.-centric arguments is the role of our foreign policy in creating the conditions that push people in Central America and Mexico to make the long, arduous, and frequently fatal trek north. In the 1980s, Washington and its neoliberal collaborators began imposing policies that favored multinational corporations and hurt the working poor. And on that note, neoliberal collaborators, what does that mean? Washington and its neoliberal collaborators. So take a short detour to this book, How Politics Makes Us Sick, Neoliberal Epidemics, by Ted Schrecker and Claire Bambra. I am so horrible with pronouncing names sometimes, but you know what I'm saying? I'm doing my best. That's all I can really say. If there's a correction that anybody can shoot at me if I ever make a mistake of saying names or words incorrectly, please be polite about it, and just, correct me, but don't be an ass about it. So, neoliberalism essentially means market fundamentalism, means that a lot of means that everything should be a business transaction, essentially. Every kind of industry or every kind of social issue can be handled by a market and should be handled by the market. But what do we mean by neoliberal collaborators? So, neoliberal collaborators, that includes other Western nations, but it also really includes the World Bank and the IMF. It really includes the World Bank and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. These organizations provide loans for other countries, and a lot of times these loans comes with stipulations, comes with conditions, with policies that must be implemented if you're going to receive this loan. And a lot of times those policies, well, I'll get into it. This will tell you. The result was an expansion of structural adjustment lending by the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, in which policymaking was and is dominated by the U.S. and a few other high-income economies. I want to read that again. The result was an expansion of structural adjustment lending by the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, in which policymaking was and is dominated by the U.S. and a few other high-income economies. The U.S. is very influential in what policies are attached to these loans, what policy conditions are attached to these loans. The conditions attached to these loans emphasized reduction of subsidies for basic items of consumption, such as food, rapid removal of barriers to imports and foreign direct investment, rapid removal of barriers to imports and foreign direct investment, so opening up their economy to foreign companies. Reductions in state expenditures, particularly on social programs such as health, education, water sanitation, and housing. So a reduction on basically money spent by the state on social programs. And rapid privatization of state-owned enterprises. The privatization of the state-owned enterprises basically means U.S. companies or foreign companies. It makes it easier for them to come in and take control of whatever commodity or resources there is in that country, because it's not controlled by the state. It can be controlled by a private owner, a commercial owner. And rapid privatization of state-owned enterprises on the assumption that private service provision was inherently more efficient and that proceeds from privatization could be used to ensure debt repayment. So, the World Bank and IMF try to neoliberalize countries. That is one of their biggest goals. Is to neoliberalize economies so that Western U.S. commercial interests can thrive, can flourish, so that U.S. commercial interests can siphon wealth from these companies easier. This is just explaining what is meant by neoliberal collaborators and how Washington works with them to impose policies that favor multinational corporations and hurt the working poor. So that's what this book just elaborated on. But back to ICE. For at least 150 years, the United States has intervened with arms, political pressure, and foreign aid in order to protect the business and military elites of these countries who have prospered by impoverishing their people. Now, now the U.S., a lot of these countries, when there is a positive leader, a positive progressive left leader, the United States does whatever it can to get rid of them. Because a lot of those cases, they oppose the U.S. imperialist mission, the neocolonialism that the U.S. imposes on the planet also. They oppose capitalism most of the time. They are for socialism, the socialist policies that help the people. And the U.S. doesn't like it. Let's continue. Still, illegal immigration from the region remained modest until the 1980s, when the U.S. government and its neoliberal collaborators at the IMF and World Bank, told you, began imposing policies on the region that favored large multinational corporations, undercutting the small farms and businesses that had supported the working poor. Meanwhile, many of the oligarchs became partners in the growing narco-trafficking business. Protected by government officials, criminal gangs have spread throughout the region, adding threats of kidnapping, extortion, rape, and murder to the daily life of people struggling to make a living. A young Guatemalan recently told me, unless you are connected to one of the families that run this country, there is no future here. Either you work for the narcos or you go north. And this isn't an isolated incident. This is what the US does. This is how the US became powerful in the position that it's in. This is what it does to other countries. And when we think of ICE and when we look at all those children in cages and when we think about, deportations and separating families and all the horrendous things that we also want to talk about when we talk about ICE and Trump, we have to look at what caused the immigration in the first place. Before they even got there, what are they running from? And when you realize they're running because of us, when you realize these people are running because of our country, and it started way before Trump, and in fact Obama and Hillary Clinton were involved, and before Obama and Hillary Clinton, the previous president and the president before that were involved, and it goes back decades, and it goes back actually over a century that we've been messing around in Latin America and Central America. When you look at it like that, you get a more holistic picture. And when you think of ICE, you can't just say Trump is bad. When you think of ICE, we have to think holistically about our own nation, the United States. We have to think about the United States and what our country is doing and exacerbating that or causing these things. Because we're in the belly of the beast. And it's important for us to learn about our nation and learn about what we're doing, what our tax dollars are doing around the world. Because we're paying for this. We're paying for the destruction of these countries. Like with money, like with our income tax, with our taxes. Hillary Clinton has called for a fence before. We want to talk about, I honestly get irked when people just complain about Trump, and say nothing else about our system as a whole and how how they have zero awareness, how people have zero awareness of the other side of the aisle and what they have done, and in ways that's more dangerous, because if we have Hillary Clinton, Obama, Joe Biden, and Bill Clinton, all of these people that we're looking at, that people look at as role models, but they are implementing the atrocities around the world and domestically, but we ignore it for some reason, but we point all our fingers at Trump. That's dangerous, because we got crooks getting away with murder, literally, but we're ignoring them. That's why I'm so much harder on Democrats than I am on Republicans, because Republicans don't have a mask on. You see the devil. You see the terrible stuff. But people don't see that with Democrats. It's harder to see with Democrats because they might be more eloquent. They are the evil in a suit and tie. They are the evil with swag. And that swag makes us ignore whatever it is they do. And we're blind. That's more dangerous. And Malcolm X talked about liberals being more dangerous. Malcolm X talked about liberals being more dangerous because they're ignored, because they get away, because they smile in your face and we see them as a friend, even though we see their teeth. And they're out to eat you, just like just like conservatives are out to eat you. So if we want to solve this immigration border problem, if you want to call it that, we have to change our foreign policy. And to change our foreign policy, we need an educated population of people to know what our country's doing and demand in some form a stop to it. And if that demand means, I don't know what that demand means, but I mean a a a an effective way of turning around our foreign policy. So I'm on Wikipedia with um, a list of Latin American nations that the United States has fucked with. Argentina, Brazil, Cuba, bruh, Cuba. The United States has been fucking with Cuba for a while, and even today, United States has sanctions imposed on Cuba, which sanctions are a form of economic warfare, like an actual war tactic. And Cuba has a blockade imposed on it, a financial blockade um, that that strangles their economy. But even through that, they are surviving. They have a better healthcare system than we do. They have a better education system. Um, Chile, after the democratic election of President Salvador Allende in 1970, in an economic war ordered by President Richard Nixon, among other things, caused the 1973 Chilean coup d'etat with the involvement of the CIA due to Allende's democratic socialist leanings. Just look at this list: Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, Venezuela. The United States fucks with Latin America. And because of that, we have people trying to flee their land. This other article, Coming to Terms with the U.S. Role in Central America. These observations are very much related to today's events. It has been estimated that almost 70% of the children who crossed the U.S.-Mexican border in 2014 came from what is called the Central American Northern Triangle, formed by Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. 70%. Those three countries have suffered from U.S. intervention in their social and political affairs. 70% of the children who cross the U.S.-Mexican border come from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, the Central American Northern Triangle. And these three countries have suffered from U.S. intervention in their social and political affairs. Um, so every time we think about ICE, think about that. Think about these are people affected by U.S. foreign policy. Straight up. And Trump didn't do that. Hillary Clinton did that. Obama did that. Bush did that. Bill Clinton did that. Even before Bill Clinton, Nixon did that. Reagan did that. John F. Kennedy did that. Actions have consequences, and interfering in other countries' affairs can have long-lasting effects. This is especially true when one considers what happened in Central America. It would be naive to blame the U.S. for all the ills in much of the region, but it would be equally naive to ignore how U.S. intervention in Central America has helped create the situation that plagues the region today. Yeah, so that's basically it for this episode. I hope you learned something. I hope you can teach me something. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. Tell me what you liked. Tell me what you didn't like. Tell me your opinion. Tell me anything interesting that you would like me to talk about. Tell me something interesting that you would like to talk about. Um, Drop your knowledge also. And I hope you have a great day, night, afternoon, what have you. And peace out.